Hello everyone, welcome back to Guide to MYP. Through this video, I aim to provide you all with an understanding of how the MYP works, the structure, the components that make it up, and so much more. So now, without further ado, let us begin the introduction into MYP. Now before I get into the nitty-gritty, let me explain where the MYP falls into place in the IB continuum. Essentially, the IB has divided the educational journey of students into three main sections. The first is the Primary Years Program, also known as the PYP. This is for students in classes 1 to 5. It focuses on nurturing the natural, curious mindset in students and building the basics. Then we have the MYP, the Middle Years Program, which I'm sure all of us here are here for. It's kind of like the bridge that connects the mindset with deeper knowledge. And it's for students between class 6 to class 10. And then finally, we have the Diploma Program, or also known as the Careers-Related Program, as offered in some schools. It's for students in grades 11 and grade 12. Now, more specifically, let's get into the MYP. The MYP is a 5-year program designed specifically to meet the educational requirements of students during their crucial and critical middle years. It is an inquiry/research-based program that aims to holistically develop a student, equipping them with skills that are necessary and essential in the real world and in life. Now, when we look at the MYP, it as a curriculum intends to strengthen several aspects in an individual or a student, mainly 3. The first is, as highlighted previously, the research-based approach that focuses on the importance of students to go out of the confines of their curriculums taught in school and learn more, broadening their horizons, and in general, being more inquisitive. Now, just to sidetrack a little, the IB's philosophy of inquiry can very easily be seen in their approach to learning. For example, the topic lists that they provide are very vague and can encompass many different aspects of each unit. And so, schools and educators must, using their expertise, narrow it down and specifically start teaching content. This content, however, is non-exhaustive, and you must do your own research to truly excel in your eAssessments. And while what the teachers and educators teach you is enough for you to get a good grade in the MYP or an okay grade in the MYP, it's your own research that will truly help you excel with your exams and with your knowledge. Now, that's exactly why, even on my website, when I uploaded the topic lists, I mentioned that they are non-exhaustive. No matter how much detail I put into them, they are still not exhaustive. The second is intellectual change. Here they emphasize rigorous learning and content while making those practical connections between what they've learned in the classroom and the real world. And finally, we have the third aspect, which ties in very nicely to the second, and that is international mindedness. It cultivates active learners who are creative, critical, and reflective thinkers, ready to engage with global issues. Through this, you're able to apply what you learn in school to the real world, making all the knowledge you learned very relevant, and consequently, making you a global learner. Now, there are a few key components of the program. These are aspects that you must complete in order to achieve your certificate for the MYP. The first is your service as action. Then there's the eAssessment, and then there's your personal project. In your service as action, it's a foundational element where students engage in meaningful service projects to make a positive difference in their communities. Then you have the eAssessment. It's in the final year of your IB, so grade 10 or MYP 5 with those of you who are familiar. And schools may register their students for the IB validated exams, which are basically online exams, on-screen exams, or your e-portfolio coursework. And this is mandatory for you to achieve your official IB MYP certificate. Now, it's important to note that there are some schools that do this differently. They don't do the external exams, they do internal exams. It's perfectly all right, it's just dependent on the school you study at. Then you have your personal project, and this is a major component of your IB program. It's the independent project that you as a student take on to explore a passion or solve a real problem. And it usually takes place in grade 9 or grade 10, although this differs again based on school. I'm going to go into the depths of each of these aspects. So, the first one is the personal project. So now let's delve into this. What is the personal project? Well, it's a major independent project completed in the final year of the MYP. Students choose a topic or issue that they're passionate about, set a clear goal, and create a product or outcome that demonstrates their learning. When we look at the assessments and grades, the project is assessed over 4 criteria, which is common for most subjects in the MYP. The first is planning, which is A. Then there's B, which is application of skills. Then there's C, which is reflection. And then finally D, which is your product or your outcome. Each criterion is graded out of 7 marks, leading to a total score of 24, which then determines a final MYP grade. Now, it's important to note that these 7 points count towards your final MYP 56, so it's important to take this seriously. Now, what do students do actually? Well, students, they research their topic, plan and manage their project over several months while keeping specific and regulated account. They create a final product and write a report, 15 pages to 20 pages, explaining their process and their learning. Now moving on, let's get into the ATL skills. Now the ATL skills are a very important part of the MYP. It's basically a portfolio of all the skills that you start to develop as you go on through the journey, and it's extremely prevalent in the personal project, the community project, and the services action. Now I'm going to highlight just a few that I think are quite common, and then of course you guys can go ahead and read about it further. Now the project strongly develops ATL skills that include research skills, self-management skills, organization skills, critical thinking and creative thinking, communication skills, and reflection, to name a few. Now moving further into the impact it has on its students. Well, it helps students develop independence, confidence, and deeper inquiry skills. It prepares them for future academic challenges, such as the ones that you face in the IBDP extended essay or research projects that you might be doing at uni. It just helps you build some really long-term skills. Okay, so now let's get into the service as action. This is another key component of the IB. I'm going to explain what it is, what its goals are for an MYP student, and how it benefits you. What can you do, and examples of activities, and again, in the end, how it links to your ATL skills. Now, the first thing, what is it? Well, the services action is an integral part of the MYP curriculum, where students engage in service activities to contribute positively to their communities and apply their learning. It is rooted deeply in the IB's vision of education as a way to develop internationally minded, compassionate, and active global citizens. Now, here are the goals. These are just to name a few. It's to develop awareness of community needs within its students, help students take initiative in addressing these needs, collaborate with others to make a positive impact, apply and reflect on their classroom learning to real-world contexts, develop empathy, responsibility, and intercultural understanding. Okay, now let's look at the practicality. What do you actually do? Well, in simple words, you as students need to identify needs or gaps in your local or global community, plan and carry out meaningful service activities, and just bring positive change in your community. These activities are connected to your, as I said previously, classroom learning, and it allows you as students to develop as caring and principled individuals that know how to take action and make a positive difference. Now, if you're, stuck, here are just a few things that you could do as your services action. You could organize a local environmental cleanup, for example, a beach cleanup. Or you could volunteer at a local charity or food bank. You could also support a fundraiser for a global cause by raising money, maybe at your school. You could tutor younger students or peers. You could raise awareness about any social, environmental, health issues. Anything at all, it all counts, as long as you're making a positive difference in your community. And once again, we have our ATL skills. As I mentioned previously, these will be prevalent throughout your MYP course. These are just skills and learner portfolio aspects that help you develop as an individual. Okay, now let's get into the academics of the MYP. It's primarily divided in 8 subject groups. The first is language acquisition, the second is language and literature, then it's the individuals and societies, then your sciences, mathematics, arts, physical and health education, and design. Over the course of this video, I'm going to explain every single element in depth. So let us begin with our first one, that's language acquisition. The main aim of the language acquisition program in the MYP is to develop communication skills and foster intercultural understanding and global engagement within its students. It's divided primarily into 6 different phases: the emergent, capable, and proficient. These levels are not based on your age, and they're based on the prior proficiency or experience you have in that learned language. For example, extreme beginners to a language would go into emergent, whereas experienced individuals would go into the proficient section. And this is usually sorted out by your school, but here's just a basic outline. Now, there are a few key features that the IB wants to hone in its individuals in terms of the second language. The first is multimodal literacy, where beyond just reading and writing, students are able to view and interpret visual and digital media. This is just broadening your horizons into truly understanding a language rather than just memorizing it and learning it for school. The second is cultural and identity. It explores the relationship between language, cultural, and personal identity to build international mindedness within its students. Moving on, let's get into the eAssessment. Now, if your school chooses to do the eAssessment, it's an externally assessed exam which tests you in your listening, reading, and writing skills. Your speaking skills, on the other hand, will be internally assessed and then externally moderated. It won't be part of your eAssessment. And then your final score will be a composite average of your grades across all your exams. So these are the 4 skills that you will be practicing: your listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So the purpose and focus of this section or this subject group is that it wants students to be able to use language as a path for thought, creativity, reflection, and learning. Students develop critical and creative approaches to analyzing texts and forming their own non-literary and literary pieces of writing. It focuses on producing coherent, purposeful texts for various different audiences and contexts. The core skills that this section aims to develop are your listening, speaking, reading, writing, viewing, and presenting skills. Now, the learning approach is firstly very inquiry driven, where students are meant to explore concepts and big ideas rather than just basic content memorization. And the second is global contexts, connecting learning to interpersonal, personal, local, and global issues to build relevance. Now let's look at the assessment criteria. You're tested again on 4 criteria as you are in most subjects in the MYP. Criteria A is about analysis. It's focused on interpreting content, context, language, and style, and bringing the essence out of any piece of writing. Criterion B is organizing, the coherence, the structure, and development of ideas. Criterion C is how well you produce a text, the creative process, stylistic choices, audience awareness, etc. Then criterion D is your use of language, your vocabulary, your grammar, syntax, etc. Now, this is just a very general overview of how the course works. I will be making more in-depth videos, so hopefully stay tuned to that. Okay, now let's get into the individuals and societies. Now, this basically is a subject group that has multiple subjects underneath. Either your school would offer you an option of taking history or geography, or just integrated humanities. So these are the different, subjects within this group. Now, the inquiry approach is human experience, systems and structures, and then again, our global context, where you're investigating how people interact with each other and the environment across time and space, analyzing political, economic, and social systems that shape our world, and then understanding how our local issues through a global lens to develop international mindedness. There are several skills that are developed through the individuals and societies, such as research, argumentation, evaluation, and communication. The assessment criteria, again, out of 4, however, they're a bit different in the case of the humanities. The first is criterion A, knowledge and understanding, where you're able to demonstrate content knowledge. Then you have criterion B, which is investigation, where you're planning and conducting research. And then thirdly, you have communication, where you're presenting your information effectively. And finally, your criterion D is thinking critically, analyzing concepts and events. Now, I'm making a more detailed video on the individuals and societies as well, breaking down history, geography, and integrated humanities, so stay chimed in for that. Okay, now let's get into the sciences. Now, there are three main disciplines. The MYP Sciences curriculum usually includes three main disciplines, which can be taught separately or as an integrated science course. It's usually divided between biology, chemistry, and physics. However, I think it's important that everyone note that some schools offer an integrated science course. Now, there are a few key outcomes. The first is critical and creative thinking, research and design, scientific investigations. Then there's diverse perspectives, where you're able to appreciate and respect the ideas of others. And the third one is responsible citizenship, develop ethical reasoning and global responsibility, usually something you'd see when you're learning and practicing for your criterion D in your exams. Now, the inquiry focus. The scientific method. There's a lot of emphasis on research, observation, and experimentation through hands-on practical work. Then there's global connections, which link science to ethics, culture, economics, politics, environment, and social responsibility. Now, these are the inquiry focuses out of the main knowledge that students learn. Now, again, the four criterions. The first one is knowledge and understanding, the scientific knowledge and concepts. The second one is inquiring and designing investigations and hypotheses. These are just your experiments. And then criterion C is processing and evaluating, where you're able to collect, analyze, and evaluate data. The fourth is reflecting on impacts, the science in society and the environment, politically, ethically, and economically. This is your criterion D tasks, which I'll also go over in my future videos. In fact, I've talked about the criterion specific information on a document in my website, so I've linked that as well, and you guys can check it out. Now let's get into mathematics. Now there are two pathways that you can take. The first is standard maths, which just provides sound knowledge of basic mathematical principles for all students. And then you could pick extended maths. Extended maths are basically additional topics on top of what's taught in standard maths for greater depth, breadth, and challenge. And it's usually recommended for students who want to pursue maths at a higher level later in their academic journey. Now, there are a few content strands, and again, this is a very basic version of it. The first one is numbers, second is algebra, third is geometry and trigonometry, and then there's statistics and probability. Now, when we look at the inquiry approach, on top of the basic knowledge, it focuses heavily on real-world problem solving. Mathematics is taught as a tool for understanding the world and not, just the basic calculation. Students learn to model situations, find solutions to familiar and unfamiliar problems, and justify their reasoning using appropriate mathematical language. Now let's look at the assessment criteria. Again, it's the same four strands, but the first one is the knowledge and understanding, the maths, the content. Then the criterion B is investigating patterns, where you're able to select and apply mathematical problem-solving techniques. Then there's communicating, where you're using appropriate mathematical language and terms, just the way you write and present your information, your formulae, etc. And then criterion D is applying your maths in real-life contexts, where you're able to identify relevant elements of authentic situations. Okay, so now let's get into the arts. The arts encompasses several different disciplines, such as visual arts, music, theater, etc. And it's a very reflective practice, so central to it is a process journal, where students document their artistic journey, research, experiments, and reflections, emphasizing that the process is as important as the final product. Creating nice segue into the process-focused learning. The arts curriculum is designed to function through a cycle of inquiry, action, and reflection, and students explore the arts across time, cultures, and different contexts. Now let's get into the assessment criteria. Now this is very general, but let's get into it. Criterion A is about, again, knowledge and understanding. In this context, it would be the arts forms and the context within the art forms. Then criterion B is developing skills, which is all about technique and application. Then there's criterion C, where you're thinking creatively. You're creating your own piece of art, regardless of the discipline. So that's the artistic intention. And then criterion D is responding, where analyzing your work and evaluating. Okay, so now let's get into the next subject group, that's physical and health education. Now, the core focus is to empower students to understand and appreciate the value of being physically active and to develop the motivation for making healthy life choices. It fosters a holistic development, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social, and contributes to a healthy and balanced lifestyle. There are a few different learning areas. The first is fitness and movement, then teamwork and collaboration, goal setting, and healthy choices. Then when we look at the assessment criteria, the criterion A is about knowledge and understanding, criterion B is planning for performance, and criterion C is applying and performing, and finally criterion D is reflecting and improving. Okay, so now let's get into our final subject group, and that is design. So the core focus of design is to challenge its students to apply practical and creative thinking skills to solve real-world problems. There's an emphasis on ethics and sustainability that ensures students consider the environmental and social impact of any of their creations. Now, there are a few different skills that are developed within design. The first is innovation, where students are able to develop novel solutions through creative thinking techniques and lateral approaches. Then, there's the building of practical skills, where students are able to use tools, materials, and software safely and effectively. And a few more skills include research, ideation, prototyping, testing, iteration, and documentation. So now, let us understand the assessment criteria. Criterion A is inquiring and analyzing, criterion B is developing ideas, criterion C is creating the solution, and finally criterion D is evaluating. So now, let us get into the summation of your final points if you do the eAssessments. The reason why this is so important to explain is because there are often some misconceptions regarding the points being added up, and I will get into that. So basically, you have 8 subject groups with 7 points offered in each, and 7 times 8 will of course give you your final score. However, here's the tricky bit. As I explained earlier, you have different subject groups, but you may be doing multiple subjects within that group. But since only one score can be picked, they pick your best. Let us look at this by way of an example. If you're a student who takes, let's say, 2 sciences, physics and chemistry, and you get a 7 in your physics but a 6 in your chemistry, only the 7 will account towards your final grade. However, your chemistry grade will still be part of your transcript. Now let's look at this and break it down. Where did each of the 8 groups come from? Well, the first is from your external assessments, where you get 7 points from each of the following. Up next, you have the coursework. Now, you do have the language acquisition here, however, it's a mix of both aspects, the external assessments and the internal coursework, the speaking exams. As well as this, you also have the coursework from your creative subjects. Finally, the last subject is your personal project, which also contributes 7 points. Now you might be thinking, where's the services action? Well, even though the services action doesn't amount to the total points, you won't receive your MYP certificate unless you finish the services action, learning outcomes, and volunteering work. So I hope that kind of sums up how the eAssessments work. Okay, now let's look at the key features of the MYP. Some of these I've mentioned earlier, but I find it easier to sum it up in the end. The first is global contexts. Well, the global contexts are an extremely important part of the MYP, and you'd find it influencing even your eAssessments. Now, if you want to know a bit more about how global contexts, influence each subject, please do check out the Guide to MYP, and I've linked that particular document in my description below. Now, the global contexts help students connect learning to the real world. There are 6 main ones. The first is identities and relationships. The second is personal and cultural expression. The third is orientations in space and time. The fourth is scientific and technical innovation. The fifth is fairness in development. And then finally, the sixth is globalization and sustainability. Each year is essentially assigned one of these global contexts, and that influences how your exams go. Okay, now the second is the conceptual understanding. This is basically ingrained throughout any subject that you learn or any MYP textbook that you pick up. It basically has concepts, and these concepts are essentially big ideas that have relevance within specific disciplines and across your subject areas. The first is key concepts. These key concepts are broad and organizing ideas like an umbrella, and then under that you have related concepts, which are subject-specific driven concepts. Now, what these concepts try to do is urge or push an inquiry-driven learning approach within each discipline or each subject area, essentially making you a bit more research project in terms of your orientation towards the subject. And then, of course, we have our ATL skills, our approaches to learning. I've highlighted this throughout the video and you won't get enough in the IB. The first one is interaction, then language, collaboration, information literacy, media literacy, affective skills, organization skills, reflection, critical thinking, creative thinking, and transfer. These are things that I can't emphasize enough. You must know, honestly, to excel in a good personal project report or to develop yourself. This is universal. So that's your ATL skills. And of course, finally, you have your services action, which I highlighted earlier. So these are the key core concepts or the core ethoses of the MYP. Okay, now here are the compiled 6 main benefits and impacts that I believe the IB MYP brings to you as students. The first is engaging and relevant learning. You as students are able to connect everything that you learn in your classrooms to your local, national, or global wider world. And this element just makes the education so personally meaningful and motivating. The second is the balanced and flexible curriculums. The broad framework allows schools to firstly meet their local requirements while ensuring that students explore a great breadth and a great depth of subjects. The third is the preparation for future success. Now, I believe that the IB MYP program equips you with skills that will help you in the long run. It equips you with research skills, communication skills, softer skills, as well as academic knowledge, a very holistic learning that's truly going to aid you throughout your life. And of course, that ties in well with the fourth one, which is the skills for lifelong learning. And now we have our fifth one, which is the IB Learner Profile Development. Again, stringing on the last 2 points, it nurtures the whole student, developing students and individuals who are principled, caring, open-minded, and reflective members of society. And the last one is the digital assessment. I personally really like the way we're assessed, the structure of the exams, the different criterions it tests in every single subject, and even the e-portfolios. Okay, well, that just about sums it up. However, I still do have a few notes for you guys.